So far on my homemade table saw project, I've made this depth of cut adjustment mechanism. Next I need to make a fence for it that's better than this one. And this is the fence I made for my previous homemade table saw, and it's worked out quite well except for two minor issues. The first problem is when I lock this knob, quite often I turn it to an angle where it sticks up above the table, and then I have to either loosen it or tighten it some more so it doesn't interfere with the workpiece. The other problem is as I slide the fence side to side, it often binds a little bit, and this might be because this hook can move side to side a bit, so I'm going to try to make that a bit tighter. So here's my updated design, and I've printed some one-to-one plans, and I'm going to build this using my homemade table saw. My previous fence was built out of nice Baltic birch plywood, but because I don't want to spend any money on this one, I'm going to use some scrap plywood that actually came from the garbage, and hopefully that'll be good enough. So these shapes for these two parts are simple enough that I'm just drawing the geometry on here rather than gluing on the template. Next I need to cut out this part here, and that's also coming from some plywood from the garbage, which is this piece here. Next I need to cut the fence rail, and I've got a cross section of it here, and I'm going to make that from this piece of construction lumber. I'm ripping it on both sides just to make sure that what I have is straight. I need to cut a rabbet on the bottom that corresponds to the thickness of this part. The way it goes together is these two pieces, which are already glued together with this part, and then the fence goes on top of here. One problem is these two pieces should be about the thickness of the table, and that doesn't quite line up, so I need to thin this down a bit. Man, the inside of that plywood looks awful. I think I'll cut a bit more off of it. It's totally critical that this is square. The fence is going to clamp to the bottom edge of the table, and I still need to reinforce that. This edge made out of particle board is probably not that strong, so I'm going to glue this piece of hardwood, which came from an old drawer, on there to give me lots of stuff to hold against. Now with the square clamped to the table, I can do the final tweaking of the fence right angle before I screw it together. And then clamping that together tightly. This fence is not as straight as I was hoping it would be, so I'll have to fix that by putting some shims under it on this side. Shims inserted, and now it's straight. Now I could already use this rip fence just by locking it in place with a clamp like this, but I want to make a dedicated clamp that is attached here, and for that you really want to use the best possible plywood you have, not necessarily this crap that I'm using, but I want to see how cheap a material you can still get away with. Well, these came out pretty awful with the jigsaw. I'll trim them flush with each other after I glue them together. This is the bottom side of the fence, and the clamp goes on here with two little blocks to hold it in place so it doesn't fall down. And it's going to get pushed against the fence here using a T-nut in here and a bolt that comes through a hole in here. The tricky part is making sure it has enough clearance that the hook can back all the way out so that the fence can be pulled back. I also added these two tabs which help keep the fence level, and a rubber band on two screws here which makes sure the hook is always fully engaged. And finally I glued a block of wood in here to fill in this rabbet so that once I cut a miter slot I won't have the end of the fence dropping into it. I still need to add miter slots and a stand for this saw, and I'll do that in my next video.